In this video, we'll give you 6 quarterbacks we like in 2024 fantasy redraft leagues. I'm Jim Coventry along with Anthony Servino of RotoWire.
Jim, the first quarterback that I like going into fantasy draft season, Patrick Mahomes, and this is a player I have not been able to draft enough of this offseason, and a big reason why we're getting him behind guys like Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts. We're getting Mahomes as the quarterback 3 off the board, and considering the weapons that they brought in for him this offseason, we get a healthy Travis Kelce. They bring in Worthy and Hollywood Brown. Rashee Rice, we don't know about the suspension. It could happen this year, but the closer we get to the season, I can see a world where he doesn't get suspended until 2025. And plus, Isaiah Pacheco, fine running back, not a lot of depth behind him. So we could see Patrick Mahomes kind of revert to the quarterback that we've seen a few years prior, where he was a quarterback 2 in fantasy points per game in 2022. We've even seen a quarterback 2 finish back in 2020. I'm all in on Patrick Mahomes this year. We know what we're going to get from this guy. Even on a bad year last year, he was still the quarterback 10 in points per game and a quarterback 8 overall. That's an outlier for Mahomes. This guy is normally a top 5 quarterback, locked and loaded, and he finally has the weapons, really for the first time since Tyreek Hill, to get the job done. On a ceiling play, he can finish as the overall quarterback 1. He's done it before. He doesn't bring a lot to the table when it comes to rushing floor, but he has a 50 touchdown season and a 41 touchdown season on his resume. So he's the first quarterback I really like going into fantasy drafts.
First quarterback I like, if I'm going to take one earlier, is Lamar Jackson of the Baltimore Ravens. Jackson threw for 3,678 yards in 16 games. Now, that doesn't sound like a great passing season. It was actually 500 yards better than his first MVP season in 2019. Now, he did play one less game. I get that in that season, but still, marked improvement. But what I liked about Jackson was he had 3 games with 300 passing yards, and 2 of those came in the last 4 games. Also, his touchdowns improved. After 4 multi-touchdown passing games through week 12, Jackson had 4 in his last 6 games. So that tells me the Todd Monken offense was starting to seep in. Jackson was getting better within it. And therefore, we could see even more this year. And remember, those increased numbers came when Mark Andrews was missing time after that week 11 hip drop tackle that put him down for a long time. Now, Jackson threw 24 passing touchdowns, 3rd most of his career. But of course, we know the running. That's what makes Lamar Jackson a special fantasy player. He had at least 35 rushing yards in all but 2 games and 50 or more rushing yards in half of his games, including the NFL playoffs. And of course, even with Derrick Henry there, Jackson will still get some touchdowns. Jackson scored a touchdown in 8 of 18 games. That includes the playoffs last year. Henry's going to get some, but Jackson may score some of his from outside of the goal line because, again, he could break away as a runner at any time. The receiver room, like I said, Mark Andrews, back from injury. Zay Flowers, 2nd year in the NFL. There could be improvement. There are questions beyond that. If Devontae Walker, the rookie, could be a deep threat, that'll help. There's a little bit of question. Jackson lost 3/5 of his offensive line. They did keep their 2 best players. But all that said, Jackson has a great floor, a great ceiling. He's a good value at ADP.
Jim, the next quarterback I like going into the core of fantasy draft season, Dak Prescott. Right now, we can get Dak Prescott QB7 off the board. And this is a guy who finished as the QB3 last year and the QB4 in fantasy points per game. Now, this wasn't an outlier season. If we go back to 2019, he was the quarterback 3 in a points per game basis. Now, 2020, he looked like he was going to follow that up with a monster year, averaging 27.9 points per game, but only in 5 games. He had that injury. The next few years were a little bit rocky with QB9 and QB13 point per game finishes. So what happened last year? No more Kellen Moore. You cue up the Mike McCarthy offense, and that was one of the best years of Dak Prescott's career when it comes to completion rate, when it comes to passing yards, when it comes to passing touchdowns. And again, was just year 1. Now, look at the offseason. Not much of a semblance of a running game brought in. We know Zeke's a chain mover. We know he's going to punch it in through the end zone, but this isn't the same Ezekiel Elliott. This offense is going to be uber reliant on Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb, who are both playing for new contracts. That's just more incentive for these guys to play well. Now going into year 2 in the McCarthy system, another change that doesn't really have to do with Dak, but could affect Dak. Now, Dak last year 4th in pass attempts, 7th in team pass plays per game. Those numbers could go up, and here's why. Dan Quinn, sensational D coordinator outside of the playoffs. He's now the head coach of Washington Commanders. Now they bring in Mike Zimmer. Mike Zimmer's been out of the league. Very good D coordinator, but this defense could take time to adjust, which means this Dallas Cowboys offense, they might be playing from behind more than last year. They might be in more shootouts than last year. You have to remember, Dallas were popping in a lot of games that it was in control and they were playing with the lead. They might have to be throwing the ball for real, which means we could see Dak possibly have the 3rd or better most attempts in the NFL, which is really good for his fantasy production.
If you like videos like this, please consider hitting the like button and subscribe to the RotoWire Fantasy Football channel on YouTube. Also, check out all of our fantasy football content and rankings by getting a free 2-day trial. No credit card needed. Just go to rotowire.com/Jim to see all of our content. The next quarterback I like in 2024 drafts is Kyler Murray of the Arizona Cardinals. Remember, back in 2022 in December, Murray suffered an ACL injury, put him down for the rest of that season, put him down until week 10 of 2023. So to say injury prone based on the last year's, it was one injury. Kind of hard to knock that against him. Early in his career, the first 2 years, Murray rarely missed time, did have a shoulder injury in his 3rd year. Now, last year, when Murray did come back, he didn't have a great receiver room. Marquise Brown was injured with a heel, missed a significant time. Also, Michael Wilson missed a lot of time. For periods of time and a significant amount of time, Trey McBride was actually Murray's de facto top receiver. And when Murray got going, he was able to run again off the ACL, 24 to 49 yards in his last 4 games. Now, that said, another year removed from the ACL, that rushing may get back to those earlier career numbers. And Kyler Murray, despite that diminished supporting cast he had, scored between 19.5 and 26 fantasy points in 7 of 8 games. That is rock solid this year. Marvin Harrison comes in. Michael Wilson, year number 2. Trey McBride will see far less attention than last year because of the receivers. This is a great situation for Murray. Again, I expect him to run a little bit more. Don't be surprised if he makes it into the top 5 or 6 quarterbacks.
Jim, the next quarterback I like going into draft season, Joe Burrow. And Joe Burrow is a quarterback that I've been 1 foot in, 1 foot out on when it comes to fantasy. When it comes to NFL, I think he's the 2nd best in the league. When it comes to fantasy, it all depends on if we're going to get a healthy Burrow. 2 seasons in where Joe Burrow played 10 games, not great for fantasy, quarterback 18 and quarterback 21 in points per game. But in the 2 seasons that Burrow has played at least 16 games in 2021 and 2022, he's given us quarterback 10 and quarterback 4 point per game finishes. Now, in those 2 healthy seasons, he's thrown for at least 4,527 yards and 34 touchdowns. And here's a fun stat. In 2022, when he was the QB4 in points per game, he even rushed for 5 touchdowns. So when this offense and Joe Burrow, when they're humming, he's getting a job done and they're putting points on the board any way they can. Now, there is no more Brian Callahan, but they promoted the OC in-house. So we're going to get a similar Zach Taylor type of offense. That doesn't bother me much. Even losing Tyler Boyd. Tyler Boyd's been a nice piece, but as the seasons went on, he was less involved in the offense. We're going to get T. Higgins. We're going to get Jamar Chase. Maybe Jermaine Burton produces. Maybe Mike Gesicki, who is expected to line up a lot in the slot. Maybe he produces. But this offense has enough firepower for Joe Burrow to put up big-time fantasy numbers. One more thing, similar to what I said about Dak Prescott. This Bengals defense, I don't know how much I trust it. They keep losing players. It's regressed since that big Super Bowl year. This could be a team that's going to have to throw the football to win games. And there's also no more Joe Mixon. There's no more that reliable Joe Mixon who could move the chains. We're looking at a backfield right now with Zach Moss and Chase Brown, two very questionable running backs. That could be another reason why Joe Burrow throws a lot. And if we go back to that 2022 season where he played all 17 games, he was 5th in passing attempts and 7th in pass plays per game. And even last year, where Burrow only played in 10 games, they did not stop throwing the football because they had to throw the football. This team was 8th in pass plays per game. And again, this was a year where Burrow only played in 10 of those games.
The last quarterback I like in 2024 fantasy drafts is Kirk Cousins of the Atlanta Falcons. Now, look, last year, week 8, Achilles injury. I get it. But that injury saps explosiveness. That is not an issue for a player who hasn't had explosiveness in many years and is a pocket passer. I see no reason for downgrading him. Also, Cousins moves from the Vikings to the Falcons. Well, Kevin O'Connell, coach in Minnesota. Zach Robinson is coaching in Atlanta. They both come from the same Sean McVay tree. Cousins has already said it's been very easy to learn the system because he knows the system. Now, before the injury last year, Kirk Cousins was on pace for a career year. At the time of his injury, in almost half of the season, he had 31 yardage, 18 touchdowns to 5 picks. And he's average, Kirk Cousins has 30 touchdowns from 2017 to 2022. So we know he can produce at a high level. He gets Drake London as his alpha receiver. Sure, it's not Justin Jefferson, but it's a very different player and he can win in a lot of different ways. Kyle Pitts had not been deployed well under Arthur Smith. Should see more of a varied role here. Darnell Mooney has sub 4.3 speed and can definitely stretch the defense. Atlanta's defense also may not be great, so Cousins is more likely than not to throw off.